Some people don't struggle to trust others. They simply stopped trying a long time ago. And if you look closely at them, really closely, you will notice something. They are often the most attentive people in any room, the best listeners, the ones who remember what you said 3 conversations ago. But ask them something real, something that requires them to open even slightly, and there is a pause, a subtle recalibration, and then, very smoothly, they redirect. Not rudely, not coldly, just carefully. Because somewhere along the way, someone taught them that being open was not safe, and the lesson was thorough enough that it never fully left. Society tends to call these people guarded, cold, cynical, sometimes even damaged. But that framing misses something essential. People who struggle to trust are not simply paranoid, and they are not wired differently from birth. In most cases, they are operating a psychological survival system, one built not out of irrationality, but out of very specific, very real experience. And to understand that system, you have to go much deeper than the surface label. You have to ask the harder question. What did they survive? And why did their mind decide this was the safest way to keep going afterward? Most people who trust no one did not start there. That may be the most important thing to understand. They were not born suspicious. Many of them were, at an earlier point in their lives, the opposite: open, emotionally generous, the kind of person who assumed the best about people before any evidence existed to support it. The shift happened somewhere in the middle, not because their personality collapsed, but because their psychological safety was broken in a way that felt irreparable. Society looks at someone who keeps everyone at arm's length and assumes they chose this, that they have always been this way. But what is far more common is a person who once trusted completely, was hurt precisely because of that trust, and then quietly built a new life around a single rule: never again. The distrust is not a personality trait. It is a scar that learned to look like armor. To understand why that rule forms the way it does, you have to understand how trust actually develops in the human brain. Trust is not a conscious decision. It is a slow accumulation of felt safety, a kind of neurological data that builds across repeated interactions and gradually tells the brain, this person is not a threat. Several specific conditions are required for this to happen. Predictability is critical. When someone's behavior is consistent, when their actions align with their words over time, the brain slowly stops treating them as a potential danger. Emotional safety matters. The belief that what you share will not be used against you later. The ability to repair a relationship after conflict matters deeply. And perhaps most importantly, vulnerability must not be punished. When all of these conditions exist and repeat, trust develops. When they are violated at the wrong moment, in the wrong way, the damage is often permanent. The betrayals that break trust do not always look dramatic from the outside. Sometimes it is a close friend sharing something private in a way that feels almost casual, as though what you handed them with care was simply interesting information to pass along. Sometimes it is an intimate partner who used your fears, your soft places, your most honest admissions as leverage in an argument. Sometimes it is realizing slowly, over months, that someone you trusted was performing closeness while quietly keeping score. And sometimes it is older than any of that. Caregivers who were emotionally unpredictable, who moved between warmth and withdrawal without warning, teaching a child very early that love was conditional and that the conditions could change without notice. The brain stores these experiences at a particular depth because they occurred during vulnerability. When the defenses are down, the mind is most susceptible to what it encounters. A betrayal during trust is not just a painful event. It is a lesson delivered directly to the part of the mind that decides who to let in, and that part of the mind does not forget easily. So the brain rewrites its safety rules. New internal beliefs form, not through deliberate reasoning, but through a felt logic that becomes the invisible framework through which all future relationships are evaluated. Beliefs like, people eventually disappoint you, do not feel like beliefs. They feel like observations, like something you have simply noticed about the world. The conviction that the more someone knows about you, the more they can hurt you, that does not feel like paranoia. It feels like basic arithmetic. These rules begin operating quietly in the background, shaping perception before the thinking mind can weigh in. And because they were born from real experience, they are extraordinarily resistant to being reasoned away. What develops over time is something psychologists describe as hypervigilance, a state of sustained, heightened alertness in which the brain is constantly scanning the environment for early warning signs. People who trust no one are often remarkably perceptive. They notice the slight shift in someone's tone before the sentence is finished. They notice when a story changes between tellings. They notice delayed replies, the way energy in a conversation shifts when a certain subject is introduced, the micro-expressions that appear and disappear in half a second. But perhaps the least visible part of this vigilance happens after the interaction ends, because distrustful people often replay conversations in full, returning to specific moments, examining what someone meant beneath what they said, questioning whether they revealed too much, whether some small disclosure will now be used against them. This mental replay is exhausting, but the brain does not experience it as a flaw. It experiences it as diligence, as the kind of careful attention that might have prevented the last wound, if only it had been activated sooner. This same vigilance is what makes kindness feel complicated. When a distrustful person encounters someone who is unusually warm, unusually generous, or emotionally available too quickly, the first response is rarely gratitude. It is analysis. What is the hidden motive? What does this person actually want? And specifically, why so fast? Because the brain has learned something particular about fast closeness. People who compliment immediately, who ask personal questions in early conversations, who seem emotionally invested before any investment has been earned. These behaviors do not read as genuine warmth. They read as a pattern, a familiar sequence. Intimacy was the setup, betrayal was the conclusion, and the brain, which is extraordinarily good at pattern recognition, is not willing to forget that sequence. Simply because a new person seems kind. Over time, this vigilance often hardens into an identity. People who distrust develop a particular kind of pride in their self-sufficiency. They learn to need less, to solve their own problems before the thought of asking for help can fully form. They say things like, "I only rely on myself," with a conviction that is completely real. But beneath that conviction, if you go very carefully, there is often something quieter. A person who once wanted deeply to rely on someone, who reached toward that and was met with pain, and who then decided the reach itself was the mistake. The independence is genuine, but it was constructed on the foundation of something that once wanted to depend. What almost no one sees is the deliberate, careful way many distrustful people test others before allowing any closeness at all. These are not conscious strategies. They are instinctive calibrations. A small personal detail shared early, not out of openness, but to observe what is done with it. Watching how someone treats other people when those people are not looking. Noticing whether someone who promised something small actually follows through. Each observation is a data point. Each response either earns a fractional increase in trust or confirms what the brain already suspected. The tests are rarely announced, but they are almost always happening. Alongside this is a pattern of emotional containment that runs so deep it eventually feels like personality. Distrustful people often show very little in public. No strong emotional reactions, no visible distress, almost no requests for help. Not because they don't feel strongly. Often they feel more than most. But they learned early that expressing emotion was information, and information was vulnerability, and vulnerability was the specific state in which they were hurt. So they contain. They present a surface that is readable, but not penetrable. And they carry what they actually feel. Somewhere further in, where it cannot be accessed without permission, they are not yet prepared to give. Sometimes the fear of closeness becomes active, not passive, not just cautious, but moving. When a relationship deepens beyond a certain point, when someone begins to know them in a way that starts to feel real, the withdrawal begins. Not always dramatically. Often it is subtle, a slight increase in distance, less responsiveness, a slow emotional retreat that the other person can sense but cannot explain. What looks like sabotage from outside is not experienced as sabotage from within. It is the brain executing a preemptive defense against a pain it believes is inevitable. Better to create the distance now, before the other person creates it later, at a time and in a way that cannot be controlled. The relationship ends before it can be ended. The closeness retreats before it can be taken. And this is the loneliness most specific to distrust. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of asymmetry. Because people who trust no one often know a great deal about the people around them. They listen carefully. they observe, they accumulate. But those same people know almost nothing about them in return. The distrustful person is always the witness, rarely the witnessed, always the one holding information, never the one being held. And they feel that imbalance even when they cannot name it. A room full of people can be its own form of solitude when you have made certain that none of them will ever truly reach you. The psychological irony at the center of all of this is quietly devastating. The brain constructs a system to prevent pain, and in a specific way, it works. The sharp, sudden pain of being betrayed by someone you trusted completely is avoided. But the system creates a different pain in its place, slower, more diffuse. The dull ache of being present without being known, of living in proximity to warmth without ever allowing it to land. The armor keeps the wound from being touched, but it also keeps the wound from ever fully healing. Rebuilding trust, when it happens at all, is not a decision. It is an accumulation. It requires consistent, safe experiences delivered quietly over a long period of time. Not a single grand gesture, not one person proving themselves dramatically, but repetition. The same reliability, again and again. Vulnerability met with care, again and again. The brain does not lower its defenses on the basis of good intentions. It lowers them on the basis of evidence. And it requires a great deal of evidence before it changes a rule it built to survive. The people who trust no one are not always the coldest people in the room. They are not the most broken, or the most difficult, or the most closed. Sometimes, often, they are the ones who once trusted the most. The ones who were most open, most willing, most generous with their faith in people. And they paid the highest price for it. What looks like coldness is the scar tissue of that payment. What looks like distance is a system built by someone who wanted closeness badly enough to be destroyed by its absence. Some people don't struggle to trust others. They simply remember too clearly what happened the last time they did.